Hello, I'm Padma Rao, and WION has the privilege of being the first international network to chat with Sri Lanka's new Foreign Minister, the Honourable Mr. Ravi Karunanayake. Good morning, Mr. Karunanayake. Thank you very much for talking to WION. Honourable Minister, it hasn't even been a month since you were sworn in as Sri Lanka's new Foreign Minister, and here you are in India on your first overseas visit. Many analysts here are pleasantly surprised that you've come to India and that you didn't fly to Beijing instead. What made you choose India?
Why is that question mark there? Sri Lanka, India is our closest neighbor and has been a time-tested friend. And I thought it was absolutely essential that I come to India first. And on that basis, I'm honored that the Indian Prime Minister, External Affairs, and all the relevant people have given the opportunity for me within 11 days of assuming office.
That's great, but we're actually even more pleasantly surprised, Honourable Minister, that you didn't drop in on your other close friend, which is Pakistan. Sri Lanka buys $150 million worth ammunition from Pakistan. They helped you defeat the Tigers, and in fact their military and police establishment has even offered training to yours. But as you know, our point of view is different. We see Pakistan as the country that trains arms and infiltrates terrorists into our region to wreak havoc here, for instance, in Jammu and Kashmir, in the Indian state of Jammu and Kashmir, and also the terrible terrorist incidents on 26/11 in Mumbai. And in fact, sir, you had 33, I think, Sri Lankan Muslims who went to join the ISIS. And the ISIS, as you know, has just opened its South Asia bureau, so to speak, in Pakistan, with the intention of further causing harm and damage to India. So, sir, we're also surprised that you didn't drop in on Islamabad instead of coming to New Delhi. Can you explain that?
Yes, well, as you know, as a foreign policy, we adopt friends with all, enemies with none. Terrorism has no space at all anywhere, whoever the country is, friends or foes. It is three evils that needs to be taken out. That is terrorism, separatism, and extremism. So in that pursuit, we've got to see a Sri Lanka first strategy and able to go forward. World is in a spin. You're talking of free trade captains today talking of protectionism, while the protectionism order is now talking of free trade. So on that score, we got to realign ourselves, come back to basics, and ensure terrorism is wiped out of the face of the earth. So your direct question means that anybody that perpetuates terrorism has no space, but let us see as to how things go on.
Very last question on Pakistan, and I'll leave it alone, sir. There are these worries. There were these 33 people from Sri Lanka who joined the Islamic State. The Islamic State has opened with great fanfare its presence in South Asia. Don't you see that as a cause of concern, for this relationship souring between Pakistan and Sri Lanka?
But certainly, with seeing what is going on in the world, we see any of this in any corner is bad. So I would like to study more on that area as to how developments have taken place. But I'm sure there's no safe haven at all for any of them.
Welcome to India anyway, Mr. Karunanayake. We know that you met Prime Minister Narendra Modi and External Affairs Minister Sushma Swaraj and the National Security Advisor, Mr. Ajit Doval. Let's go one by one. I'll leave your meeting with the PM to the very end. What did you discuss with Mrs. Sushma Swaraj?
Well, as you know, we have had a very close relationship, and my predecessor, Mangal, had done an excellent job in maintaining relations from what we inherited from the previous regime. So it is my bounden duty to ensure that we take it to greater heights. And there were certain bilateral matters, there were certain matters of intricacy that were discussed. And at the end of the day, we very openly was mentioning each country has its own self-interest. So Sri Lanka first, and we pursue how we got to get things done politically, diplomatically, and economically. Commercial diplomacy has come to stay here, and we would like Sri Lanka to be to India what Hong Kong played a role into China. Now it's one of the same, but that's the type of role that we like to see, able to take our strengths and the greatness that is there in India, work along with the regional partners and ensure conquer the world.
I'll just take a little tangent there, sir, because you mentioned China and Sri Lanka playing Hong Kong to India. Isn't there a fear that Sri Lanka itself is turning into a kind of a Chinese protectorate, in its on its path to becoming the Hong Kong of South Asia? After all, Prime Minister Wickremesinghe, the Honourable Prime Minister, was at the OBOR summit recently. Repeatedly, there has been talk of giving the Chinese 80% stakes. A sixth of your external debt is towards China, 80% stakes in the Hambantota port, a 99-year lease on 15,000 acres of land, close to the port, predominantly farmland. So isn't there a fear that Sri Lanka is becoming a protectorate of China only because it's indebted to it?
Padma, if you look at what we inherited, it was 200 years and freehold. We basically converted it thereafter. You're asking us as to the trading abilities. Doesn't India trade with China? So it is commercial interest that comes along, where each one has his own national interest, and we must know exactly where it is going to. On the score that you basically asked about, how aggressively we have got to take forward, I believe that we have fashioned the future political and diplomatic aspect from that commercial diplomacy, and we will ensure that China is given its share, but India plays a role that is there. The Hambantota port was first offered to India, so why didn't India take it? It's not that we are debt-ridden, yes, but that doesn't mean we sell our soul. We will ensure that we get the commercial aspect. We had two things. When we inherited a debt-ridden economy, we had two things to do. Either we carry the white elephant along, or we make it commercial. So we looked at commercial is what? We basically look at aggressively going forward, but we didn't have the capacity and the wherewithal. The next was to ensure that a debt-to-equity swap. So that's where we offered India, and I guess it basically had its own reservations. And looked at, but if 80-20 is the problem, I don't think that looked at it, just that we are going to get 80% of debt covered. But there are many other opportunities that can come aboard. But now that you have built a Hambantota port, our taxpayers are paying debt servicing, you might as well make the best economic return out of it.
So 80-20 is not the issue, but a 99-year lease is. I don't think anybody lives 99 years. How are you going to ensure 99 years? Let me give you an example. The United States took a lease in our region, in the Indian Ocean region, a lease of 50 years on Diego Garcia in the Chagos Archipelago. 50 years later, they were not prepared to leave. They made it very clear that we're not leaving and we're here for good and we're staying. So, there are these dangers when there are powers with strategic ambitions, which China certainly has in the Indian Ocean region. Aren't you afraid that we're not going to be around in 99 years and there might be nobody to oversee the handing back of Sri Lanka's sovereignty?
Well, I don't think you need to look at it from perspective of the only option available. I mean, with India being so close to us and, as friends, you've got the European Union and the US all working along. China is another friend that works along. All working together is the best way forward. And we believe, as our diplomacy goes, friends with all, enemies with none. I mean, I don't think it's in exclusion that you've got to look at. It is how you've got to look at working along together is the way forward.
But India boycotted the OBO, as you know, did not attend. Obviously, that sent a message, sent a signal. So do you really foresee cooperation between, as you say, the global sort of, community in the Indian Ocean regions, especially when China is involved and it's One Belt, One Road initiative, of which you are a part and the Maldives are a part?
Padma, as for India's decision is completely their sovereign right. And as you know, the shipping line that we have been there has been there for the last 2,500 years. So while before my Prime Minister went for the One Belt, One Road initiative, he came to India and he discussed many matters that were there. So it's just a continuity of our commercial diplomacy that we basically looked at. Because Sri Lanka is a pivotal point, and in the international shipping route, you cannot do a route without Sri Lanka. So we got to leverage our best out of it and ensure the maximum comes along. So, I mean, as I mentioned before, India had the opportunity, and I'm sure they'll have the opportunity in the future as well. We'll always work along with of everybody's interest at heart, because otherwise it just doesn't pay.
Sure. So I'll let you off the hook about China for now, and let me return you to India and welcome you to India once again. You mentioned, that you spoke of matters of intricacy with the Honourable External Affairs Minister Sushma Swaraj. Let me put what the matters of intricacy are to you as far as India is concerned and Sri Lanka. We are worried. I think I expressed our worries and concerns about China and Pakistan. We're also, looking at Tamil autonomy, which we have been looking at for a very long time, and of course the relationship with China and Pakistan, as I said. What are the issues as far as Colombo is concerned, Mr. Karunanayake, matters of intricacy? What, if I were to ask you, are the top 3 matters that Sri Lanka wants New Delhi to look at so that you can work towards a better relationship?
Well, certainly our election platform was that we look at a new constitution, we look at a multi-religious, multiracial ethnicity, that's the fabric of our Sri Lankan population, is brought in so that everybody is able to live in acceptable environment, and through that process to ensure that we speeden up the reconciliation process. Now, reconciliation does not necessarily only mean Tamil Sri Lankan. It is the Tamils, the Sinhalese, the Muslims, the Hindus, all have been working closely together, and we need to move forward on that area. And I believe that this is the best opportunity between a president who comes from SLFP and Prime Minister who comes from the United National Party, both working together. Is a golden opportunity with the leader of the opposition to fashion out the way to the future. And I'm sure India plays a pivotal role in this process.
Still, you met the National Security Advisor, Mr. Ajit Doval. Mr. Karunanayake, you would agree that if there is a National Security Advisor present at meetings with the Foreign Minister of Sri Lanka, there is an element of security that the Indians are concerned about. For instance, the docking of Chinese submarines in Sri Lanka. Could you expand on that? Is there something you would like to say to reassure India and the Indian viewers that, you know, the Chinese military is not just going to simply drop in as and when it likes, because this is a region of which it is not a rim state?
Well, we have taken a policy that our national security as well as regional security, that submarines are not an issue. It's an offensive weapon, so it is that it doesn't need any docking at all to any point. So I guess that's an issue that is of the past.
Let's go global now. The U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, Mr. Karunanayake, Ms. Nikki Haley, she yesterday slammed the United Nations Human Rights Council passing resolutions against Israel, but none against Venezuela, she said, for alleged human rights violations, in inverted commas. The U.S. threatens to leave the council altogether. Now, your previous government under President Rajapaksa had successfully withstood this fierce pressure that there was from the Council for foreigners to investigate alleged human rights abuses by the Sri Lankan Armed Forces on Sri Lankan soil. Now, your government has co-sponsored a resolution with the US, which is pretty much directed against your own country and your own armed forces, in the sense it allows for greater international participation. Sir, you are the new foreign minister. If the United States itself thinks the UNHRC is a sham, as was implied yesterday, where does Sri Lanka and this resolution that you co-sponsored with the United States, where is it left? Where does it stand?
Padma, you've got to get back to history as to what we inherited. You would know that during 2012, the then Foreign Minister, Mr. G.L. Pires, with the full knowledge of the President Mahinda Rajapaksa, ensured that they gave certain conditions. And from then onwards, Sri Lanka got hooked on to certain international obligations that had to be pursued. And we inherit that my President, Prime Minister and Mangala then had to take on from what was given to Sri Lanka. So we managed to look at certain areas of importance, certain areas of no-goes, and then come up with something which is acceptable when we were on the firing against the firing squad. So now I think the world has realized that we are a country, that democracy is absolutely important. We believe in the international community go along, but Sri Lanka's sovereign interest comes first. So on that basis, we believe that, our armed forces have done what they got to do, like what is happening in UK, like what is told by the American president, and while all other areas where terrorism has inflicted today to them, which was unknown to them then. So I'm sure they are realizing what we went through 30 years, and I'm sure their steadfast help will come along when you go forward and get things done. So just mooting and supporting a joint declaration does not in any way impede on any of those.
So are you ruling out the presence of foreign observers and foreign investigators into alleged human rights violations by the Sri Lankan Armed Forces?
Well, I'm only a small nut in the machinery, but my President and Prime Minister very categorically said there's no go on those. And we will not compromise the Sri Lankan sovereignty for external intrusion into an internal affair.
If that has already been decided, Mr. Karunanayake, why did Sri Lanka successfully seek and receive more time to get back to
there are certain areas that needs to be looked at. We have had our problem, but the problems of magnitude are not what is being faced today by United Kingdom, by the United States, by Germany, by France, and all of them have been the modern world, looking at which they didn't face then. And we little countries had to face then is realized today as to what it is. So it's a changing world. You've got to look at fashioning ourselves to be with it. You look at America is talking today protectionism as their way forward. Now that was something completely alien then. So are you telling me America should not change their policy? They believe America first, but we believe Sri Lanka first.
Mr. Karunanayake, I'll come to Sri Lankan domestic issues. You were earlier Sri Lanka's finance minister, and just 6 months ago, Sri Lanka was very proud of you. The 90-year-old London magazine, The Banker, named you the best finance minister in the Asia-Pacific region for the year 2016. You achieved several things. You increased the number of tax-paying citizens in Sri Lanka. You secured a very urgently needed IMF loan, and you made many other moves. Surely you didn't deserve to have that portfolio snatched from you, as it were, for another, the Foreign Office, where your actual experience, you are also a chartered accountant of some renown, where your actual experience doesn't lie.
Well, I think the change comes in at a time when there is commercial diplomacy required. And I'm sure the award that was obtained by me was helpful for the President and the Prime Minister to take the same thing, finance and diplomacy, put together to move forward. So let's see how we go on to the unborn future with a sense of satisfaction that we can achieve the same thing we achieved in the financial field.
So what you're saying is that you sense a synergy in global politics and business and economy.
Oh, yes.
That it's almost one and the same.
Absolutely. It is extension, I must say. I mean, while finance, you do a domestic affair, foreign affairs, you do an external affair. So the local and the foreign both come in. There is Sri Lanka as your command. Today, the world is at your command.
But isn't Sri Lanka somewhat more fragile than most other countries given the external debt situation?
Well, debt alone is not something. I mean, America is 10 times greater in debt than what we are. But owing to the fact that they are a vibrant economy and a dominant economy, you know, people look at it from a different perspective. But certainly, we have extricated ourselves from a time bomb that was there on a financial, debt servicing basis today to neutralize it and able to bring in a sense of financial discipline, which has helped it from a malfunctioning economy to a fully functional economy today.
Do you see it, are you sort of taking this up as a challenge, a role that you don't really, that you haven't been trained for, but you see a synergy and you're taking it on as a challenge? Are you confident that you are the right man with the right portfolio
well,
at the right time?
Only time can test that. But I'm sure my leaders have decided that there is ability that I do possess, that I can certainly make it best for Sri Lanka. So as much as I got what I did for finance, I'll certainly achieve for my country on behalf of the diplomacy.
So what's your next stop after India, sir? Where do you go next internationally?
Well, internationally, I would basically look at the South Asian region, and we'll basically look at the US owing to the fact that there's the invitation that is coming. We need to go to Europe to thank for the GSP that they gave us, and then together holding their hands, taking little Sri Lanka into the world.
Two very last questions, sir, pertaining to Prime Minister Modi. I did say I'll come back to him at the end. Prime Minister Narendra Modi too has taken a series of very bold steps in, in the area of economy and like demonetization. And he's put India's economy back on track, and he intends to pursue FDI to develop the infrastructure that any emerging superpower like India needs. Now, as the world's best ex-finance minister of a country that is steeped in external debt, are there any leaves that you perhaps took out of Prime Minister Narendra Modi's book during your trajectory?
Oh, certainly. He's been certainly a great motivator. This is not the first time we saw him coming in 2015 to Sri Lanka, open Sri Lanka up to the Indian investors, etc. And there has been a success story. The most important striking thing is that bold and daring decision that he takes. India in the past was caught up with the bureaucratic system that was there. But today this is something of the dead past. You today taking decisions and putting India into 20 years ahead. We little Sri Lanka was far ahead in administrative and the bureaucratic structure, and now we are lagging behind. So I think that was very motivating with the way that Prime Minister Modi has been actioning, and I've certainly been a great motivator of the same. I've taken a leaf of his approach to politics, which is daring and bold.
And yet, for all that, the FTA between Sri Lanka and India is still dangling. There are a host of issues. There's this fear in Sri Lanka that the Indians are going to overwhelm the tiny island of Sri Lanka. Where are you on the FTA? What progress has it made?
Well, if you look at China invading and that's the problem, if you look at India invading and that's the problem, Sri Lanka will have no future. We believe that we have given an economic openingness to the world, and that is what the Prime Minister has very categorically said, that we need a pro-growth approach, which increasing our exports from that 11 billion to 20 billion and increasing our FDIs to 5 to 10 billion in the next 2 years. I guess it is, we look at Sri Lankan investors given the opportunity first. If they are unable, we look at technology know-how coming in, failing which you have FDIs coming in. All three together will have that economy that is wanted by our Sri Lankans. You can't expect us taxpayers to be continue paying taxes and not getting economic return. That's where we want to broaden the tax base, have a higher tax compliance, and ensure the debt burden is reduced through economic activities.
Very last question, sir. Was this the first time, Mr. Karunanayake, that you were meeting Prime Minister Narendra Modi? What did you think of him? Give me some anecdotes. What did the two of you talk about? We saw pictures of you.
Well, it's the third time I've met him after assuming office. I met him before. But certainly, every time I meet, the next meeting has been much more happier and much more things to learn than the last one. And I guess the most important aspect that is the follow-up action that he has. And the success of a country would certainly believe in not only talking, but walk the talk. And that's what we will, Sri Lanka, do to integrate ourselves into the world.
And what did you chat about during those pictures?
Well, those are matters of common interest that is there, of national interest that is there, and advice that is given as a young guy coming to politics with a veteran expert who has seen through many areas, and becoming a Prime Minister of India is no easy task. So I'm sure he has given us certain food for thought, and I'm sure I can communicate that to the President and the Prime Minister and take Sri Lanka with its relationship with India to heights that I've never seen before.
What did you think of his shifting the focus, interestingly, altogether of Indo-Sri Lanka relations by coming down there on Vesak Day, as opposed to up to now, the shift, the main weight has always been thrust upon the Hindu links between India and Sri Lanka. But to actually recognize and acknowledge Buddhism as the majority religion of Sri Lanka, did that change things around a little bit in the psyche of Sri Lankans, who generally look upon Indians, as coming from Big Brother India and with a certain amount of distrust, even though with love?
Well, I think that distrust was something which has been planted by many unscrupulous elements. It has been a Big Brother approach, but certainly the Big Brother is there as and when required. And that Big Brother should look at as to how to extricate ourselves and bring us together to be as Big Brother's best friend. So I think that has been what Prime Minister Modi has been doing. And certainly Buddhism came from India. Why can't the Indian Prime Minister come to Sri Lanka and further fortify that? So I think it is necessary to we are a Buddhist country, working along with the Hindu nation, and ensure that we spread peace to the world and ensure that the world is a more peaceful and a livable world.
Honourable Minister Ravi Karunanayake, it's been a pleasure talking to you. Thank you for meeting exclusively with me and with WION.
Thank you very much, and I look forward to seeing you in Sri Lanka.
Absolutely. Thank you. That was Sri Lanka's new Foreign Minister, the Honourable Ravi Karunanayake, on his very first visit overseas, and that to New Delhi, speaking exclusively to Padma Rao at WION.
And Padma, in fact, is with me here in the studio. Let's have a quick chat with Padma about that interview. Padma, we heard him a short while ago, Mr. Karunanayake. He's a trained chartered accountant, but now being given this post, how does it really work? This is big responsibility. What do you think could be the reason, rationale behind the government choosing him to lead this post?
Well, if I were to go by what he told me, the reason is commercial diplomacy. It's commercial diplomacy that plays a role nowadays in global politics. And I did ask him whether commerce and diplomacy almost run hand in hand, bilateral relations. He said yes. On the other hand, the stories emanating from Sri Lanka are slightly different. Mr. Karunanayake had some unproven graft allegations against him even while he was finance minister and beyond. So some people say that is the reason why he was divested of that portfolio because there were rumors, swirling around, unsubstantiated rumors. Some others say that it was, precisely because of this that they felt that in a situation where a country has huge external debt and a sixth of that is towards China and China is sprawling all over Sri Lanka, that it might not be such a bad idea to have a chartered accountant that is someone who really knows his business and his economics, in place as foreign minister.
Also, Padma, we understand that the Indian Prime Minister was visiting Sri Lanka just last month, and now Sri Lanka's foreign minister is visiting India. Would you say that the Prime Minister's visit changed, certain aspects of the ties between India and Sri Lanka, especially looking at the time period after the Sri Lankan civil war?
I would certainly like to think so, Sana, because India-Sri Lanka relations have went into a bit of a deep freeze during the last regime in India, and in fact nothing moved, nothing seemed to move. There are still some issues that are stuck, like the free trade agreement between the two countries and also the question of Tamil autonomy. Having said all that, what Prime Minister Modi's visit to Sri Lanka did is to set a new note, a new tone to the relationship. I think it was the first time in the history of Sri Lanka that I can recollect, and I've been covering the country for 30 years, that an Indian Prime Minister chose to visit on a day which is important for the majority Buddhists. 70% of Sri Lanka is Buddhist, and that was never done before. The only connection that we seem to, hark back to time and again was the Hindu connection with who are predominantly Tamils in the north and the east. So that seems to have changed, and I'd like to think that, I'm still being guarded because there is this feeling among ordinary Sri Lankans, there's this, that India plays big brother, and they don't, really want to be subdued by India too often. So I do think that might have affected some sort of a guarded change, sort of slight optimism.
Nonetheless, there are efforts from both the sides to reach out to each other in a new way, something that you said was absent in the previous regime. Before I let you go, Padma, very quickly, what are some of the main issues, the sticking points as far as India and Sri Lanka and their ties are concerned?
As far as India is concerned, I think one of the biggest sticking points is the growing presence of China, and not only in terms of as a debtor, but as an entity that is invested in Sri Lanka, but also as a country that has strategic interests in the Indian Ocean region. Its submarines have docked in Sri Lanka. There is talk that it will eventually have its ships docking, its naval ships, in the port of Hambantota. It already is steaming ahead with the port city project in Colombo. So China is everywhere in Sri Lanka, and that's visible, and that's one of the big worries. The other worry, which is not so big at the moment, but it could eventually develop into one, is the fact that the ISIS has, they just opened its, so to speak, its South Asia bureau in Pakistan, and there were about 33 recruits from Sri Lanka who went to the ISIS. So there is a fear that the growing Wahhabi fundamentalism might make its way to Sri Lanka, and especially given that the relations between the two countries are also very good. Pakistan was one of the two countries that helped Sri Lanka win the war against the Tamil Tigers.
All right, Padma, we'll leave it at that. Thanks so much for joining us here and sharing your thoughts on that interview. For our viewers, you can catch that full interview later on our news channel, but also you can track it online on WIONnews.com. That's it from me then. We'll be back with the top stories in just a bit. Don't go anywhere.